All right, good morning everyone. I'm glad that Peter just warmed up your brains nicely and sort of melted them somewhat, but I'm going to take it down a little bit of a notch, but I'm going to talk to you today about ultra wideband, and it's some pretty exciting stuff coming out. You already saw a sneak peek this week. You might have seen some of the demos that the Sevio guys had outside. So yeah, there's a lot that's happening at the moment. So I'm going to be covering for the next 30 minutes what is ultra wideband, what is it going to be used for. There's quite a few different interesting use cases that we can have for it, and you know, what's down the roadmap, what's actually coming with it. It's been around for a while, but now we're at an exciting turning point for ultra wideband technology. So I put out a little Twitter poll late last year just saying, okay, what's on top of people's minds about technology and Wi-Fi and wireless this year? Most people said Wi-Fi 6, that was sort of a bit of a given. A lot of people are curious to learn more about WPA3 and the security enhancements, but location services are definitely top of mind. And I mean, Peter's just told us Wi-Fi 6 is going to be terrible, so let's just ignore it for the year, shall we? So really what inspired me to talk about ultra wideband is, some of you probably all noticed, as soon as they announced the iPhone 11, Apple was saying, right, you know, this is all the cool stuff. It's got 3 cameras, it can do this, it can do this. And just subtly they had this little announcement of an Apple-designed U1 chip, ultra-wideband chip, that not really many people knew about. They didn't announce it. It was there in the background of a slide. But stuff started popping up on the Apple website. And some people started doing some teardowns and some investigations into what this chip was actually going to do, what was it made of, how does it work, is it standardized? All these questions came out. And certainly I had a lot of questions. So I started to dig deeper and do a lot of research and found there's a whole wealth of information out there about ultra wideband, especially from the history that it's had, as well as some more modern articles. So you'll see a lot of links at the bottom of these slides just for reference. Don't worry about trying to photograph them or click them. I'm going to give you the slides right at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to follow up with a blog post later on as well to categorize all of these great articles and research that I've done. So you can actually go through and find it for yourself, whether it's white papers, whether it's IEEE standards, whether it's you know, other knowledge-based articles. It's definitely really useful. So what is ultra wideband? It is not Verizon's 5G ultra wideband that they're marketing at the moment. You'll see this come up a lot. There's a lot of Google search ads popping up there prioritizing Verizon's marketing for 5G ultra wideband. Let's dispel that myth now. It is not the same thing. 5G is not ultra wideband, completely different technologies, completely different frequency spectrums. This is just a marketing term that Verizon is using for 5G. What is ultra wideband? So essentially it's using pulse radio technology, and it's based on the IEEE 802.15.4 standard. So most of you are familiar with that. We've seen Peter present on that at Wi-Fi Trek and WLPC before. Things like Zigbee and Thread and all those sorts of cool things that play in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, but it's actually a really deep and really complicated standard that we've only just really scratched the surface on in the Wi-Fi community, I feel. So the definition of ultra wideband really is that the 3 dB bandwidth is at least 25% of the standard frequency of a radio transmission. And really it's basically using short pulses of really low power spectral density. This is one of the key points about ultra wideband. Really wide bandwidth, really low power. And it operates in the 3.1 to 10.6 gigahertz range. There is actually some support for sub-gigahertz as well, but this is the majority of the stuff that we see coming out at the moment. And ultra wideband, wide bandwidth, at least 500 megahertz channels all the way up to 1300 megahertz wide channels, so it's pretty cool. And you can actually have data rate use cases. A lot of people's thoughts at the moment have been around location tracking. That's for sure what the Sevio guys presented earlier this week, but it can be used for data exchange and data communications and control communications, not just location services. So talking about location services, yes, that is a key area that a lot of the work has been done on ultra wideband in recent times, is around the time of flight and measurement of radio signals for proximity and localization. This is a really cool point. This is actually what is getting me quite excited about ultra wideband. Not only is it an 802.15.4, it's an 802.15.6. Wireless body area networks. Wireless sensors for health monitoring and tracking is probably going to revolutionize Apple Health and what they have in store for the Apple Watch and things like that. So talking a bit more about what problems it can solve, of course, ranging, location accuracy, proximity detection, even using it for radar applications to better detect whether someone's breathing properly or not. That's how accurate ultra wideband can be. You can even use it for radar applications to measure through walls and obstructions and things like that, which is really cool. Security is also an interesting use case too. A lot of the products and things that were showcased with ultra-wideband at CES this year were all around secure vehicle access. So remember Tom was presenting earlier in the week about the issues with the Teslas being unlocked via BLE, and you can sort of have relay attacks, you can have man-in-the-middle attacks, people could drive off with your car. You don't have that problem with ultra-wideband. Because it's low power, ultra-wide, very close proximity, and you actually have to be physically close to the vehicle, but you don't actually have to take your phone out of the pocket. So same use case, it's just implemented in a more secure and more robust fashion. So let's talk a bit about the history of ultra-wideband. Some of you probably heard that it's been around for quite a long time. The military used to use it as well. Really, it did start out as a high bandwidth, short range, high speed communication technology. Had a few bumps in the road in its history, and it sort of changed flavors a few times. But the cool thing was in 2002, the FCC sort of started defining the regulatory guidelines around to how ultra-wideband could be used in the United States, and other regulatory domains started to follow on from there. So ultra-wideband in the IEEE world of things actually began as 802.15.3a. And this was all around Y media, wireless HDMI, all that sort of stuff, wireless video transfers. And there was a lot of politics and a lot of indecisions around, what modulation techniques were going to be used and how it's really going to be implemented. No one could reach an agreement or a consensus. 802.15.3 was thrown out. And then 802.15.4 was starting development, originally with the things like Zigbee and Thread and IoT protocols that we're sort of used to seeing emerging in the markets today. And then 802.15.4a came out, where ultra-wideband was actually introduced as a PHY. And it started off with data use cases and some ranging use cases as well. A bunch of amendments sort of happened and got rolled up into the 2011 amendment of that. 4F came out, which introduced another ultra-wideband PHY, the low-rate PHY, for active RFID and blink tags and that sort of use case. And then the most recent one that we've had is 802.15.4 2015, where we've had both the low rate and the high rate PHYs have been standardized. There's been some improvements around communications with data rates improvements and active RFID and localization and ranging and access control. So this is where it started to build momentum, where you started to get some more adoption of chip manufacturers. So the main manufacturers out there today are Decawave, which is what the Sevio guys use. They were recently acquired by Qorvo, and NXP. And now we have Apple. So what's coming down the pipeline? Already mentioned about the wireless body area networks. That's kind of interesting. Uses different modulation techniques, but at the heart of it, it's still the ultra-wideband PHY. And in development at the moment is 802.15.4z. This is where it's sort of making it ready for prime time, making it ready for the mainstream. There's improvements in terms of power consumption. There's better ranging and security improvements there. And actually, Peter from Sevio has done a fantastic white paper with some of his colleagues about the comparisons of the other ultra-wideband standards and where 802.15.4z is taking us. So that'll be one of the references that I'll post later on for you. So just like Wi-Fi, we actually have standards bodies as well outside the IEEE, and that is also another sign that things are starting to get driven into the mainstream, and they're trying to market it and advertise what the capabilities are. So we actually have the Ultra Wideband Alliance, and they are very similar to the Wi-Fi Alliance. They're basically formed 2018, so very recently, and their mission is basically to be the voice of the industry to help market the products and the chipsets out there. Very interesting seeing who's on the original founding members. Car manufacturers, Hyundai, Kia, secure access control, right? That's kind of cool. Decawave, who's now been purchased by Qorvo. Alteros, anyone recognize Alteros? Audio-Technica, audio applications for ultra-wideband, that's kind of cool. Ubisense, Denso, analog devices, Apple, Samsung, mobile devices. So this is quite a broad range of members in there. Now we've got the Fine Ranging Consortium, FIRA. They were formed in 2019, so even more recent. And they're purely focused on fine ranging and secure positioning capabilities. And again, you'll see some interesting names that came up there in the founding members. Again, car manufacturers, industrial operations manufacturers, some very cool stuff there. Even Tile. Maybe Tile's getting the ultra-wideband business, I'm not sure. So, how does ultra-wideband work? We have two different main PHYs that we're going to talk about briefly. Just going to touch on MAC channel access and frame formats. I'm not going to dive deep on that because I don't have the time to, unfortunately. And then I'll talk about some ranging and localization methods and things like that. So this particular image is probably familiar to you. You've probably seen the classification of networks based on spatial scope. Now, where do you think ultra-wideband fits? That's where ultra-wideband fits, anywhere from nanoscale up to personal area network scale. It's designed to be in close proximity, hence because of the low power spectral density that it operates at and the really wide bandwidth. It is designed for very short range communications and measurements. Now, the 802.15.6 wireless body area networks, that's where ultra-wideband sort of fits in that closer proximity with sensors and things in or inside your body, which will be kind of interesting. Might scare some people, but we'll see what happens. If we look at the spectrum and what we're used to operating in the Wi-Fi and the wireless world, just consider a noise floor across here, and GPS, high power, very narrow bandwidth, Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Bluetooth, operates in 2.4, we know that, 5 gigahertz, Wi-Fi, things like that. This is where ultra-wideband operates. This is a representation, very wide bandwidth, lots of different channels across 3.1 to 10.6 gigahertz, very, very low power. So if you think about, 25 to 100 milliwatts transmit power on Wi-Fi, ultra-wideband is whisper quiet. Very, very, very quiet. Just diving a bit deeper and separating the PHYs for ultra-wideband. High-rate PHY is operating in these frequency bands. As I mentioned, there is some support for sub 1 gigahertz, hasn't really been implemented too much lately. And then the low-rate PHY only occupies 6.2 to 9.2 gigahertz. Don't worry about zooming on this. The key point about the channels and the bands is there's some low bands in high rate PHY and some high bands. There's mandatory channel support in each of those. So that's the one thing I want you to take away from that. Pulse radio. So we talked briefly, what is ultra-wideband? It's basically using pulse radio. Now, pulse radio is doing these short pulses of large bandwidth. So short in terms of duration, and they're usually less than 2 nanoseconds. And then you can have pulse repetition rates, which increase frequency of these pulses happening per second to give you better localization accuracy, but also giving you higher data rates if you're using it for those purposes. The low rate PHY originally started as doing imaging and radar use cases, but now it's starting to develop more capabilities in terms of ranging, which is coming into the 15.4Z standard. Nice little snapshot of what a less than 2 nanosecond pulse looks like from ultra-wideband there for reference. Radio regulations. So we know from the Wi-Fi world that every regulatory domain does something different. They have different rules, they have different ways of classifying. It's no different for ultra-wideband. The big thing here is really, which bands are supported. Are they supporting, the same sort of bands? A lot of them are quite different. And the other classification is whether ultra-wideband, whether it's the low-rate PHY or the high-rate PHY, has been approved for indoor versus outdoor use, whether it's supported for mobile terminals, whether it can be used close to radar stations or astronomy stations. Everyone's got their own little rules about that. But for the most part, they all agree that the power spectral density has to be no higher than negative 43 dBm per megahertz, so really, really quiet. ETSI themselves actually have separate categories for the location tracking aspect of ultra-wideband. So they've got different classifications for whether they're tags being used by people, whether they're mobile or fixed indoor or outdoor stations versus ultra-wideband use cases for maybe military or rescue personnel. So that's just something else to be aware of if you're in the ETSI domain. Now, just like Wi-Fi, just like anything else that's sharing spectrum, even though it is low power and ultra-wideband is really resilient to multipath interference and it doesn't really interfere with too much, it still needs to play nice. It is still sharing unlicensed spectrum. So we have a couple of mitigation techniques, and some of the regulatory domains specify these as mandatory for operations. Low duty cycle is basically a passive mitigation technique where it's limiting the activity of the transmitter. So it's not really avoiding anything, it's just basically trying not to be talking all the time and give other technologies a chance to communicate on the spectrum. So the maximum transmitter on time is 5 milliseconds and it's got to be off for at least 38 milliseconds. So there's some different variations of that, but that's essentially what it is. Detect and avoid is probably more common, and this is probably more akin to what we see in Wi-Fi. It's an active mitigation technique, limits the transmit power or defers transmissions, and when it detects other systems, what they call victim systems, that might be a victim to ultra-wideband signals interfering it basically backs off, just like Wi-Fi does, and there can be different thresholds for that too. So let's have a look a bit more at the HRP PHY. Really, This is using a wider spread of bands and channels, and you can actually have up to 27 megabits per second in terms of data rate usage. And it does have precision two-way ranging. The high rate PHY allows anywhere from 499 up to 1.3 gigahertz wide channels. The wider the channels, obviously higher the data rate, but also the better resistance to multipath and better ranging characteristics. Fault error correction is using Reed-Solomon coding on the PHY for the most part, and the data rate is really confusing when you first look at the table on the next page, so don't stress out, but essentially there's 4 key data rates for the higher rate PHY, which is 0.11 megabits per second, 0.85, 6.81, and 27.24. This is taken straight out of the 2015 standard. Don't try and squint and burn your eyes to do that. Essentially, you can see the relationship between chips per second, chips per pulse, the pulse repetition frequency, and the impact that it actually has on data rates. So that's quite cool. Now the low rate PHY, it's not quite as complex as the high rate PHY. Basically, you've got 3 different modes of communications. You've got the base mode, which gives you the highest data rate. Extended mode, which sort of balances sensitivity and efficiency and data rate, and the long range is designed for best sensitivity. So the long range is designed for greater range of proximity and location sensing, essentially. So you can see here the long range mode has the lowest data rate, 31 kilobits per second, using pulse position modulation versus on-off keying for the extended and base modes, which have higher data rates. Now, channel access, it's based on what the 802.15.4 standard says, and I mean, every different PHY in there uses slightly different channel access methods depending on what they're doing, but for the most part, for ultra-wideband, it's using either CMSA, CA, either slotted or unslotted, or slotted or unslotted Aloha for the most part. It also does clear channel assessment as well. It's mandatory, but not all implementations that I've read some papers on for ultra-wideband actually follow this, purely because maybe the regulatory domain it's being operated in isn't mandating these mitigation techniques and clear channel assessments. But essentially, there is an energy detection mechanism which can then input into the detect and avoidance mitigation technique. Mac framing format, thanks Peter, I stole this from your slides on your IoT talk. It's a nice little snapshot of what the frame format is. So this is no different for ultra-wideband. This is where the standard defines this is what the Macs need to have at a minimum. But essentially, the one thing is that data communication and distance measuring with ultra-wideband requires precise synchronization between terminals. Very, very time sensitive in terms of that. So there are synchronization preambles in the headers. Now let's just change gears a bit, just going to briefly show you some ultra-wideband antennas. There's also all sorts of weird shapes and sizes that ultra-wideband antennas can come in. You've got antennas that are in your tags, in your phones, in your anchors that you're using out there as well. So for different use cases, whether it's directionality use cases, are going to have antennas designed for directionality versus wide range sensing antennas are going to be more sort of omnidirectional like we're used to in Wi-Fi. You can get microstrip antennas. You can get flexible wearable antennas as well. So think of just having an ultra-wideband antenna just sitting on the surface of your skin. I know some people have played around with NFC chips and putting them under their skin and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, there could be some crazy things coming out there. It's just a little cutaway of the iPhone 11 showing the position of where the antennas are. And if anyone's used the enhanced airdrop that Apple released with the iPhone 11, you know it's very directional. It's intended to be very directional. It basically filters out, instead of doing a broadcast to everyone that's got airdrop enabled in the vicinity to you, it's actually directing airdrop to whoever you've pointed your phone at. So those are very directional antennas in there. And those are just some cutaway shots at some of the other antenna patterns that you can have, or the actual PCB prints of antenna patterns. So let's talk about ranging and localization, because as I mentioned, there's heaps of use cases, but this seems to be the one where a lot of the products and a lot of the vendors that are using ultra-wideband out there today have actually focused on. It's the location services, the ranging and proximity detection and things like that. So essentially what you have is your anchor, which is a fixed unit. So if you saw the Sevio demo outside, they had 4 anchors plastered around the corners of the lobby out there. And then you've got your tag, which is your mobile unit. Your tag could be a literal ultra-wideband tag, like we're used to using Wi-Fi and BLE tags, or it could be your phone, for example. And then you typically have a location engine or a server somewhere else in the infrastructure that's taking in all those measurements and perhaps passing it through an API to some other system. So So there are different algorithms for measurement with various degrees of success. It's quite different. It's not like what we're used to originally with Wi-Fi location, which is using RSSI measurements. This is all about time of flight. So essentially, it started out with two-way ranging, which is basically measuring the distance as a function of the time of flight multiplied by the speed of light. This is really a sort of simple proximity messaging using 3 exchanges for messages across the air between anchors and tags. Upside of this is it doesn't require precise time synchronization. Downside is that because these messages are being exchanged, all these tags have to be programmed with the addresses of the anchors. So that's very deployment intensive, if you want to put it that way. It means there's a lot more additional configuration that you need to do. Angle of arrival is very similar to what some of the Wi-Fi location measurements with angle of arrival have done, and BLE. Phase difference of arrival, it has some upsides of less infrastructure required, but again, it requires 2 antennas to get the phase difference, which is not necessarily ideal if you're trying to get these antennas as small as possible onto a mobile device or a tag. Time difference of arrival. This is the one that most of the chipset vendors and the solutions vendors have implemented today. And this is where the tag doesn't actually directly communicate with the anchor, so you don't have that addressing requirement. Makes deployment and setup very, very simple. Downside, it's not really a downside, this is sort of expected, is you have to have precise time synchronization. If your time synchronization is out between your anchors and your upstream system and your tags, your measurements go all out of whack. So just a little underline there for TDOA. One enhancement that's coming with 15.4Z is this two-way ranging, which previously used or currently uses 3 messaging exchanges, is now being reduced to just 2 messages. So instead of it being simultaneous dual-sided two-way ranging, it's going to be single-sided two-way ranging, which cuts down on the communication, cuts down on the power consumption, and makes it a bit easier computationally as well. Use cases, I just want to sort of power through this as we start to wrap it up. I've already mentioned smart access control with your cars. So you can actually combine it with BLE, with the use case that Tom was talking about earlier in the week with Tesla. As you're approaching your vehicle from a faraway range, BLE can be used to activate through your phone sitting in your pocket or your bag as you get closer to the car, and then that can actually activate the ranging and localization of ultra-wideband to then do the secure unlocking. Secure wireless payments. Anyone heard about people having their cards skimmed in dense environments where you get your pay wave just skimmed out your back pocket? This will protect against that. Ultra-wideband does have security and ciphering mechanisms in there where people can't just eavesdrop on what your traffic is and steal your payment details. So that could be a good option for that too. We've already talked about location services. Another cool use case that we've seen with ultra-wideband is anyone aware of how the NFL does their camera tracking on the live streams and videos? There's actually ultra-wideband tags in the players' shoulder guards as well as in the ball. So the camera automatically pans to where that tag is. Really cool stuff. Healthcare, medical radar, wireless health sensors. So if for some reason you unfortunately have to go into hospital, instead of being wired up from head to toe with all these sensors, that could be wireless with ultra-wideband. Might make your experience a little bit better and not have to feel like you're rigged up to a machine the whole way. But it could also open up more granular data measuring for just measuring things at home as well, and just having sensors that you could just wear on yourself for 24 hours, for example. This is taken from the FARA Consortium website, so I'm not going to cover this. It's just a great reference for you guys. Now, quiz time. Miss Socks to give away. Anyone recognize this product? Bit of a blast from the past. Put your hand up if you can tell me what this is. Eddie? No. Yes? Yes, correct. Belkin ultra-wideband cable-free USB hub from 2006 using 802.15.3 pre-standard stuff. So this stuff has actually been around for a while. You just probably didn't realize it. These things did not work very well. They're pretty terrible. Ultra-wideband solutions for asset tracking. There is a huge amount of vendors out there, like too many for me to list, hence why I'm going to put some of this stuff into a blog post for you guys. Just some examples of what is out there. Zebra, they do the NFL shoulder pad tracking stuff, which is quite cool. UWB sensors out there, Humatics, underground mining use cases. Estimate we're going to have a product that they announced at CES a couple of years ago where you could plug sensors into your wall sockets and it would automatically map out a floor plan for you. Didn't take off, but I think that would be pretty cool. But they do have BLE in their Estimate beacons where you can actually do two-way ranging. Healthcare and audio, as I mentioned, there's Alteros and some other people, Audio Technica, that are doing things with wireless microphone systems, which is interesting. ARIA announced at CES 2020 this year that they've got the smallest ultra-wideband chip. Like, it's literally really, really small, which could be great for things like Apple Watches, Fitbits, phones, any sort of other small things that you want to put in there. Talking about the secure access for vehicles, this was also a big showcase at CES this year. Both Continental and Volkswagen have teamed up with the chipset manufacturer NXP to demonstrate and show how these use cases can be done for not only unlocking your vehicle, unlocking your house, but even things like, okay, maybe you're struggling to put your trailer on the back of your car, and it can actually do some fine ranging to detect whether you're lined up properly to mount onto the tow ball. So there's all sorts of different location examples there. So just as a wrap up here, as I mentioned, Apple and ultra-wideband is what got me started on this journey and got my thoughts flowing. Apple's been working on ultra-wideband patents since 2006. This is nothing new for Apple either. It's just been, they've been waiting for prime time, they've been waiting for standardization, waiting for, you know, the right time to put this into their phones. Literally within a couple of hours after the iPhone announcement, Brian Roamelli actually put out a great article on Quora. I recommend following him and checking him out. He's a bit of a wizard when it comes to everything voice, but he knows a lot about ultra-wideband too. So some of the other patents and use cases that Apple has had, AirDrop, that's implemented today, it's working. Interestingly, it's only using channels 5 and 10, so no one's actually figured out whether the Apple U1 chip is supporting those mandatory channels in the low and high bands or not. Maybe it's just not been unlocked yet, so maybe they're not transmitting on that, but they're definitely transmitting on channels 5 and 10. Spatial awareness. So if you can think, if you've got VBLE to give you really great, you know, per aisle accuracy in a supermarket, for example, you could use your BLE tracking to find something in an aisle, and then you could turn around and you know, enable AR on your phone and use ultra-wideband to go, where is that thing on the shelf? That's the sort of use case you could have with, you know, augmented reality. Asset tracking. Apple's had some rumours floating around for a while about their own air tags, you know, the equivalent to Tile, tracking AirPods, tracking luggage, all sorts of things in the home. You know, a lot of these things start in the consumer market in the home and then make their way into the enterprise, so there could be some interesting things about that. Apple HomeKit. One of the patents that Apple applied for was actually setting up Apple HomeKit to have your home automation, light switches and temperature sensors and everything communicating with each other through ultra-wideband. Apple Health. Already given you my thoughts on having sensors, the wireless body area network stuff. Not sure if the U1 chip conforms to 802.15.6. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That could be cool. And lastly, Apple Car. Who'd like to see an alternative, which is an Apple Car to the Tesla? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but it's on their mind, right? They just opened up the car key API to unlock your car and start it remotely. Whether it's through BLE or ultra-wideband, yet to be seen. So what's next? Education. I'm up here talking to you about ultra-wideband. I hope you'll go away and look at some of the references that I'll post for you later on. You know, the new tracks coming out with CWMP around IoT and all these other non-Wi-Fi standards. I don't want ultra-wideband to be overlooked. I think it's a serious technology. I think we need to focus on it and a bit more on whatever the next iterations of these certifications are. I know the JTAs were just carried out last month for the next track, so hopefully there's some good stuff coming out of there. Standardization. 15.4Z is not there yet. 15.6 probably still needs some work as well. So just sort of like how we've been running on things with Wi-Fi, things need to be standardized before people trust and adopt them and everything's actually operating as standard. Large-scale adoption. This is where it's actually going to, you know, improve the economies of scale. If Apple's leading the charge on this, more and more devices are going to start having U1 or ultra-wideband chips in them. Maybe that's going to drive the chipset manufacturers to improve their power consumption as well as reduce their manufacturing costs. Openness as well. So Apple needs to open up the U1 chip for the developer ecosystem for people to make use of it for third-party applications. And the same thing goes with existing ultra-wideband vendor products, actually opening up their solutions to talk to other systems and network monitoring systems via APIs. Lastly, just to wrap it up, location, location, location. Ultra-wideband has fantastic accuracy for specific use cases when you need really, really close proximity. The warehouse example that Milan gave you earlier in the week is perfect for ultra-wideband. You've got high-density environments in your warehouses. You've got fine ranging measurements of forklifts and other things in a factory. BLE and Wi-Fi is not going to cut it in there, unfortunately, but it can complement BLE. VBLE is still king in my books. Just ask the Wi-Fi ninjas. They'll tell you the same. Wi-Fi, there's some enhancements coming for location services and Wi-Fi too. 802.11az is being worked on at the moment, but there's still quite a lot of work to be done there as well. MIST is ready for ultra-wideband. UC mentioned it earlier, we had Milan up on stage. Yesterday we had an announcement of partnerships, not only for ultra-wideband, but for some other cool technologies too. So we partnered with Sevio and a couple of other awesome ultra-wideband companies too. So if you didn't see the demo that Milan posted earlier, it'll be recorded. I think have you still got this set up out the back there, out in the lobby, Peter? Yeah, no? Okay. We'll have some more stuff on that as well. So feel free to reach out. If you've got any questions, you can find me on Twitter. Here are the slides for you. Thank you very much.